Welcome to the Hobby Hangout. It's me, David, and I'll be going over the miniature I painted for a Halloween painting challenge on a mini painting Discord server that I'm a part of. I'll link the Discord in the description in case you're interested in joining. There's a lot of fun challenges there and some great painters. It was a lot of fun to do this miniature, and first I had to find a suitable, creepy-looking figure to paint. I don't have a lot of scary models that I would consider, but I ended up settling on the Nure-Onna model from Rising Sun, a board game from Simon a few years ago. And I decided to try a color scheme of a red-bellied black snake. That's what it was called. And I also decided to draw inspirations from the Ring movie for the face. So let's get to painting. So I didn't capture any video of the original painting of the belly, but not to worry, I wasn't happy with how it turned out, so I ended up covering it up and repainting it anyways, which I have later on. At this point, I'm starting off with the back of the skin on the snake body and coating it with a layer of black from AK. I'm making sure to keep the black paint thin and working it into the deep recesses and all the folds of the back of the skin. I do leave some areas white to try and identify where my reflections are going to be, but I'll cover these up in black regardless. As I finish up the black scales on the snake body, I'll move on to the human half of the monster, which is the face, primarily the hair. I am going to give it a coat of that same AK black, and the goal is to keep it looking sort of that wet looking black that covers all of her hair sculpt in the end. I have to say this face sculpt is just inherently creepy as I continue to paint this model. It's got those sunken eyes and that really blank expression. I think we need to lean into that horror element here. And I'm thinking something straight out of The Ring. That ghostly pale skin and dark stringy wet hair is what I'm going to go for as I paint this model out. As I continue painting the hair and keeping the paint thin with water, I am making sure that it's still controllable and not flowing everywhere. I'm being incredibly careful and trying my hardest to make sure I don't touch the face. I want to maintain that white base coat on the face as much as possible so that when I get to the skin tones it's as washed out and pale as possible as well. Alright, as I come back to the skin, I want to make this snake skin feel alive. I want this black to look reflective and not flat, you know, the way a snake's skin or snake scales look. So to do that, I'm starting off by taking a bit of that AK black and now mixing it with the strong dark blue from AK. I am keeping it thin still, and this mix is going to be my first true highlight color on the back scales of the snake body. I'm focusing my brush strokes on the upper curves of the snake's body and scales, and we're keeping the brush light, letting that blue-black catch the light just right. Just a quick note, the tail on this model is so thin, getting a clean line between the black scales and the red belly was a real battle. I had to go back and forth a couple of times throughout the process, cleaning up the edges with both the black and the red. So don't be afraid to take your time on fine areas like this. It's totally normal to have to clean up your lines. We're going back to the snake body for the second layer of highlights. This time I'm just using straight, strong dark blue, but it's thinned down. I want this to be closer to a filter, not quite a filter. It's still got some integrity to it, but it's not going to be a solid coat. And I'm focusing this pure, strong dark blue on the very top ridges of the scales and those curves where I want to, or those natural arches, I guess, And that's where I want to start establishing the structure for those reflective white bands that we're going to want to build into to really show how this black scales are reflective and shining white color. Alright, this next step is where we get a little scary but incredibly impactful. We're diving into the true reflective contrast for these scales using AK Interactive Pale Blue. Now, even though this is thinned down, it's still quite opaque, so it's going to provide strong coverage. You need to be bold here. Don't be afraid to lay down this lighter blue on the highest points of the scales. You'll see immediately how it jumps out. So we're painting these bright, almost white reflective bands that you see on the real black snakes. It might look a little stark right now, but that's exactly what we want. Don't be afraid here. I promise we're going to go back and we're not going to leave it looking like this. We'll be coming back later with some thin black paints and to subtly blend this down and bring down some of these highlights, making them look totally natural and integrated. After that initial highlight, I'm now mixing some off-white with that pale blue and going over the same sections just a little bit less, probably around 70 to 80% of the original highlighted bands. I'm now using pure off-white from AK in those reflective bands, limiting it to a very small area to really build that contrast. Alright, time for the blending step. This is how we make those bold pale blue highlights look natural. I'm mixing up a super thin down wash or glaze really, using that strong dark blue and black mix. You can see how watery this is. I'm going to start applying this translucent glaze right over and around those bright reflective bands. We're not painting a solid coat, we're essentially tinting the paint underneath. The goal here is to gently push those stark pale highlights back into the shadow by building up a few layers of this thin glaze. We soften the transition between the black shadows and the bright reflective spots. Because the mix is so thin, it will dry partially translucent, preserving the bright color underneath while adding that deep blue-black tint on top. The glaze has now dried beautifully, softening everything up. Now for the final crucial step to make these scales pop, applying the pure glare of light. So I'm going to use a small amount of off-white here, and I'm only hitting a very narrow portion of the reflective band that I created. Think of this as the focal point of the light reflection, the brightest, shiniest spot. You can see how the contrast gets created here and makes it feel like genuine light refracting off of a glossy surface. You don't need to do this on every single scale, so be strategic. Place them where the light would truly hit and reflect, and this will build up the illusion that the skin is satiny and reflective. Now that the back scales are done, time to redo and refine the belly. I wasn't quite happy with the first take, so I'm going back with a high contrast highlight and starting with a vibrant gold yellow from Vallejo Game Color. It's opaque and going to give us the pop that we need. After the highlight with gold yellow, I used cadmium red from AK to blend that yellow into the red on the belly of the snake. Let's bring some definition to these belly scales. I'm taking our mix of black and strong dark blue, thinned down, and we're going to define the scale segments. I'm using the tip of my brush to run a fine dark line right into the crevices. This will add shadow and makes each belly plate pop out from the next. Don't stress if it's not perfect. Next, I'm taking AK burnt red to refine those dark separation lines on the belly. I'm painting right up to the dark line to sharpen the division and make the shadows look deeper and more natural. Now that the belly scales are defined, it's time to bring that vibrant red color back to life. I'm going to be layering up thin coats, switching between AK Deep Red and a brighter Cadmium Red. I'm applying the Deep Red first as a thin layer over the areas we want to keep a little darker. This builds that rich solid foundation right next to the yellow highlights and creating a strong sense of contrast and volume. Next, I'm taking the brighter Cadmium Red and placing it right next to it and building that sequential layer and transitioning between that vibrant yellow to the deep red. One more layer of pure cadmium red thinned down even more. We're using this to really start building that gradual transition across the scale. You want to focus on where the deep and bright reds meet, just softening that line. That blending is working perfectly. Now I'm going to be applying a very thin coat right on the topmost edges of those belly scales. We're essentially using this light translucent layer to smoothly build the red transition right up to the gold yellow. You can see how this will start to tie everything together on the snake. It smooths out any of those harsh lines between the red midtones and the yellow highlight, and this layer gives that belly a luminous, almost glowing finish. With this step done, we'll be done with the belly of the snake, and we can now have that vibrant look of the red-bellied black snake. From here, we can switch over and focus on that terrifying human face. Alright, as we move on to the creepy part of the face, we want to capture that ring ghost look. We need a deathly pale skin tone. I'm going to start off with a very thin coat of AK Light Flesh, making sure I have a brush with a nice sharp point. It's crucial not to lose any of the fine detail in the sculpt, or even worse, get paint on that perfect black hairline. Once that base is dry, we immediately jump into the highlight with an off-white. This stark contrast is what gives us the ghostly pallor on the face, and we need to use it to really sharpen the features. I'm picking out the areas the light would hit most intensely: the brow, the bridge of the nose, the tops of the cheekbones. This will create that high contrast, almost skeletal appearance, making her look truly sunken and lifeless. The pale skin is blocked in and highlighted, and now we can add some coloring, light coloring, to the face. With the pale highlights in place, it's time to add those eerie cold undertones. I'm using Drakenhof Nightshade thinned down to a filter to build a dark blue shadow around the mouth and the chin. It immediately makes the pale skin look cold and bloodless and gives us that unsettling, almost drowned look. Next, I'll take Druchii Violet, again thinned down by a lot, and we're going to apply this barely there glaze around the eyes and the sides of the nose. This tiny bit of purple adds a subtle bruised quality, and that blue and violet pushes the face right into horror territory, and it's got that deathly pallor we wanted, perfectly framed by that stark black hair. Onto the last section, which is the hair. This was not easy, and it was actually the third time I had to go back and completely redo it. I wanted this hair to look like a dark matted sheet and distinct from the rest of the black scales. To achieve this, instead of using the blue-black combination, I used AK Black as the base, and then started highlighting up to German gray and eventually dark gray. The initial highlights were with German gray, focusing on the crown of the head and some sections going down, and then I built this up to pure dark gray on the raised sections. From here, I went in to pull off the striking reflections on very small sections by adding pure off-white to the highest edges. This will make the hair look reflective and glossy, but it is a huge contrast that you'll need to tone down. So the next step, I took a heavily thinned down dark gray and brushed it right over most of the white spots, being careful not to cover all of it, and pick out some of the darker recesses in the hair strands. Finally, I used German gray again to tone down and blend and glaze it back into the darkest recesses, and the result is a deep, heavy black that with just the right amount of dull reflections. Now, let's see how our red-bellied horror turned out.